Mr. Mercer, the Pinecrest Ridge Architectural Review Board has determined that your proposed gate installation does not meet community aesthetic standards and is hereby rejected. Furthermore, the board wishes to advise you that the access road adjacent to your parcel falls within our jurisdiction, and any modifications to that corridor will require board approval going forward. That letter came from Renee Stahl. She had been president of the Pinecrest Ridge Homeowners Association for 7 years. And in those 7 years, she had never once sat down with a recorded plat map and read what was actually in it. What she did not know, what she had never once thought to verify before she put her name to that page, was that I had already spent 2 weeks pulling every recorded document that touched the road behind her entrance. And not a single line of HOA jurisdiction appeared anywhere in any of them. Not in the deed, not in the HOA declaration, not in the county planning record, not in a single instrument filed at the recorder's office going back 50 years. The road was mine, or it would be, the moment I chose to make it formally, officially, and permanently so. Let me ask you something before I get into how this unfolded. If a neighbor spent over 20 years using your land because you were decent enough not to post it, and then one day decided that your decency was a deed, what would you have done? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know. My name is Dale Mercer. I am 58 years old, and for 30 years I worked as a licensed civil engineer in western Colorado. My career was spent designing roads, drainage systems, subdivision ingress corridors, and boundary surveys for counties and municipalities that later had to fight developers over the very infrastructure I had designed. I have read more plat maps, recorded easements, and chain of title documents than most people will see in a lifetime. I know what a recorded right looks like. I know what tolerance looks like when someone has mistaken it for a right. And I know, with absolute certainty, that when a road corridor is held by nothing more than informal use, it is not held at all. My 4 acres sit on the east slope of a ridge outside a small town I will call Heron Flat, about 20 minutes from the county courthouse on a clear morning. The parcel was Carol's family land before it was ours. Her grandfather, Howard Briggs, had run cattle on that hillside since 1955. And when Carol and I married in 1998, Howard made a deliberate point of sitting us down a few years later and transferring the deed to us jointly. He signed it at the kitchen table of the old ranch house in March of 2003, sun coming through the window and landing across the worn grain of the table. And I watched him set the pen down and rest his open palm on the paper for a moment before he lifted it, the way a man does when he wants to feel something settle. Carol folded the copy in thirds, slid it into a manila envelope she labeled in her own capital letters with a black marker, and filed it in the cabinet in the second bedroom behind the folders for utilities and property taxes. Neat. Unhurried. The way she handled everything she meant to keep. Carol died 4 years ago in November, from a cancer that gave us 11 months of warning and not a minute more. Our son Cody was 12 at the time. He is 16 now, and the land on that ridge is the last place his mother ever told me felt completely like home to her. Not the house in town, not her office, not any of the places we had managed to see together in the years we had. The ridge and the slope and the old gravel lane and the view east across the valley when the October light came off the far hills. She used to stand at the east boundary in the early morning with her coffee and say absolutely nothing for 10 or 15 minutes, and I learned eventually not to interrupt it. Not that land was hers in a way no document could fully record. The deed was how Howard had made it official. I am not giving it to anyone. I am not watching a development company run a road scheme across the back of it while I stand in my yard and pretend I do not understand what I am seeing. The road in question is a gravel access lane, roughly 12 feet wide and about a quarter-mile long, running along the eastern boundary of the Pinecrest Ridge development before it curves behind their brick-pillared front entrance and meets the county road at a T-intersection. Pinecrest Ridge was platted in 2001, 2 years before Carol and I received the deed from Howard. The HOA incorporated the following year. In those early years, residents of the development began using the gravel lane as a secondary cut-through, a shortcut that saved them a long loop around the ridge when they were coming from the east side of Heron Flat. Nobody ever asked permission for that. Nobody filed a recorded easement with the county. Nobody presented an instrument at the recorder's window, giving themselves a legal right to use that road. Howard waved people through because the land was large and the neighbors were few, and his family had been neighborly on that ridge since before most of those houses were a concept on a developer's rendering. That tolerance passed to Carol, and from Carol to me. And none of us ever formalized it because none of us ever imagined that a neighbor would look at 20 years of courtesy and decide it was a property right they could defend in a county office. I should have been sharper. Howard used to say you could always tell the difference between a neighbor and a problem by whether they ever bothered to ask. I called Sandra Yee the morning Renee's rejection letter arrived. Sandra is a title examiner at the county recorder's office, someone I had worked alongside on 3 different development projects in the 90s when I was still doing full-time engineering work. She is precise, methodical, and completely unmoved by claims that show up on official letterhead without a recorded instrument backing them up. I explained the situation in about 10 minutes, described the road corridor and the letter's assertion of HOA jurisdiction, and asked her to pull the complete chain of title on everything touching that strip of ground going back as far as the county record went. She called back 40 minutes later. "Dale," she said, "there is nothing here. No easement, no license, no maintenance agreement, no prescriptive claim ever filed. They have been using your wife's family's land on a handshake that nobody shook in front of a notary." I thanked her and set the phone down. I went to the filing cabinet and took out Carol's manila envelope. I unfolded the deed and read through the parcel description until I found Howard's original survey reference to the east boundary corridor, the specific legal language that described the lane and its relationship to the parcel. Then I made a photocopy, started a brown accordion file I labeled with a strip of masking tape, and put the copy of the deed in first. Renee's letter went behind it. The notes from Sandra's call went behind that. I set the file on the shelf directly above Carol's envelope, at eye level, where I would see it every single morning. A case like this is won by the person who never forgets, from the day the first letter arrives, that they are building one. What I had not yet worked out was why Renee cared enough about a road she had no right to in order to write a formal letter claiming jurisdiction over it. That answer surfaced over the next few weeks in the county assessor's records, which are public documents that most people never read. Renee's husband was Greg Stahl. Greg owned a company called Stahl Land Partners, LLC. And over the previous 3 years, that company had been quietly assembling parcels on the north side of the ridge. 6 separate acquisitions, roughly 22 acres total, bought from 3 different sellers over 3 years. I recognized the pattern from 3 decades of watching developers work. You buy the cheap, easy parcels first, and you work inward toward the value. Greg was planning a residential expansion of Pinecrest Ridge. 14 new lots, based on the preliminary survey grid I found when I pulled the county planning docket. His projected sales, which appeared in a financing disclosure he had filed with a regional lender, came to $2,400,000 if the lots sold near market value. The hinge, the single element the entire expansion depended on, was road access. The only viable ingress to those north parcels, the only route that did not require cutting through a county-protected slope at prohibitive cost, was the gravel lane along my eastern boundary and behind the HOA entrance. Greg needed that road. For Greg to control that road, someone first had to establish on paper that the road was not mine. Renee's rejection letter was the opening move in that argument. She had not written it because my gate troubled the neighborhood's aesthetic sensibility. She had written it because Greg's $2,400,000 was sitting on the other side of a road that belonged to a widower who had so far not thought to check the deed for it. I wrote the date in the margin of the assessor's printout and put it in the folder. The first formal violation notice arrived 14 months after the rejection letter, in June of the following year. It cited 3 cedar posts I had set along my eastern boundary line to anchor the planned gate frame and assessed a fine of $200. The notice stated the posts were within the HOA's aesthetic corridor subject to design review. I did not pay the fine. I sent a certified letter to the board, return receipt requested, stating that the posts were on my recorded property, outside any jurisdiction established by any document in the county record, and that the fine was not collectible under any legal authority the HOA could demonstrate. 3 weeks later, Renee wrote back. The board, she said, respectfully disagreed with my reading of the jurisdiction, and failure to pay the outstanding assessment would result in additional fines being levied. She did not cite a recorded instrument because she did not have one. I put the response letter in the folder in July of that same year. Renee arrived at the end of my driveway in a white SUV with a vanity plate, stepped out onto the gravel in a linen blazer and tennis shoes that were already wrong for the ridge before she crossed the lane, and walked up to where I was standing by the fence posts with a tape measure in my hand. She had a clipboard. She always had a clipboard. Mr. Mercer, she said, I need you to understand that the Pinecrest Ridge community has invested significantly in the aesthetic and structural integrity of this corridor, and the board is well within its authority to require compliance with established standards. I looked at her for a moment, and then I looked at the posts. I said, what document establishes that authority? She looked at her clipboard. She said the HOA bylaws and the community covenant govern the corridor. I said those documents were recorded in 2002 and did not reference this parcel or this road. She said the board's interpretation of the covenant was final on community matters. I said the county recorder's chain of title was not a community matter, it was a county record, and I would be happy to show her the instrument numbers. She told me the board would be following up with additional notices. Then she got back in the SUV and drove to the pavement. I wrote the date and time in the margin of my legal pad and added it to the folder. A second violation notice arrived in September, $300, same language, no new authority cited. A third came in December, another $300. I dated and numbered all 3, added them to the folder in order, and did not pay any of them. $800 on paper, none of it collectible, none of it real. In October of that same year, a man pulled up at the end of my driveway in a white pickup truck with a magnetic sign on the door that read Regional Compliance Services. He wore khaki pants and a polo shirt and had a laminated badge hanging from a lanyard around his neck. He told me he was there to conduct a compliance walkthrough of the property corridor. I asked him for his state inspector identification number and the name of the licensing agency that had authorized his company to conduct regulatory inspections. He said the firm was privately retained and not subject to state licensing. I asked who had retained it. He looked at his clipboard. I told him he was standing on private property without an invitation and that he had a limited amount of time to decide whether to leave. He turned around, got back in the truck, and drove out to the county road. I had his plate number before he made the turn. That evening, I looked up Regional Compliance Services, LLC, at the Secretary of State's Business Registry, and found that the company had been registered 8 months earlier by a Greg Stahl, of Heron Flat, Colorado. I printed the registration page and added it to the folder behind the 3 violation notices. The folder was now 1.5 inches thick. I bought a second accordion file at the office supply store the following Saturday and labeled it the same way as the first. The third year was when Greg and Renee began reaching outside my fence line. I run a part-time land survey consulting practice from the house, doing boundary disputes and easement reviews for attorneys and title companies who need an engineer's read on old plat maps and recorded chain of title documents. It is steady work, and I have maintained a list of regular clients for 6 years. In March of year 3, 2 of those clients received letters from a law firm retained by the Pinecrest Ridge HOA. The letters stated that my property was under active compliance review and advised that professional engagements originating from my address could be subject to legal dispute. One of those clients, an attorney named Walsh, who had been sending me steady work for 6 years, called me the afternoon her letter arrived. She was straightforward about it. She said, "I am not changing anything on my end, and I wanted you to know what arrived." She kept sending work. The other client went quiet and stopped. I documented both, dated both entries, and added them to the second accordion file. In May, the HOA's retained attorney, a man named Price, sent a formal demand letter asserting that the association held long-standing maintenance authority over the gravel corridor and would be asserting that authority going forward. Historical corridor stewardship, community infrastructure continuity, established community reliance. I read it twice and forwarded a copy to Sandra. She called back that afternoon. "They still have nothing recorded here, Dale. Not one word of maintenance authority in this chain. They are writing authoritative letters about a right that does not appear anywhere in this county's recorded instruments." I asked her to put that in writing. She emailed me a 2-page summary by 7 that evening. Plain factual language. No recorded easement or maintenance agreement anywhere in the chain going back to 1961. I printed it, put it behind Price's letter, and set both accordion files side by side on the shelf. Deputy Carl Haas came to the property 3 times over those first 3 years, each visit in response to a complaint filed by the HOA. The first 2 were about the fence posts. Carl would arrive, note the complaint, look at the posts, observe that they were on my side of the line, explain to me that he had to respond to filed complaints regardless of his opinion of their merit, and leave. He was professional, consistent and honest about the mechanics of what he was doing. On the second visit, he mentioned, almost in passing, that a properly documented pattern of what he called abusive use of the complaint process would be worth knowing about in certain offices. On the third visit, in October of year 3, the complaint alleged I had obstructed the road. I had parked my truck at the end of my driveway, on my own land, at the same spot I parked it every morning. Carl arrived, looked at the truck, noted the complaint, and stood at my tailgate in the afternoon light for a few minutes longer than the first 2 visits. He said, "If this keeps going, and your documentation is what I think it might be, the record is going to end up telling its own story at some point." He told me the threshold of documented incidents the county attorney's office generally wanted to see before they would look seriously at a harassment complaint. He did not advise me to do anything specific. He was just explaining how things worked. He drove away, and I went inside and sat with both accordion files spread across the kitchen table for a long time, counting and organizing the entries by date. I was close to the number Carl had mentioned. I was within 3 incidents of it. Cody came downstairs while I was sitting there and stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at the spread of papers and folders and tab dividers across the table. He was 15 by then, getting tall in the way teenage boys get tall all at once before they figure out what to do with the height. With Carol's way of reading a room before he said anything in it. He asked if everything was okay. I told him we were in good shape. He said Mom used to say exactly that, in exactly that voice. I said I knew, and that I would keep earning the right to say it. He said that was fair and went back upstairs, and I sat with the files for another hour after he was gone. Howard had told me once that the land was patient and that a man who kept good records could afford to be patient too. I had been keeping good records. I was still waiting to find out if Howard was right. Greg's crew showed up at the gravel lane on a Tuesday morning in April of the 4th year, 7 a.m. While the light was still low on the ridge. 4 men in 2 pickup trucks, orange survey stakes in the beds, a transit level set up near the road junction, and a stack of printed flags that read, "Stall Land Partners, Road Maintenance Assessment." Cody saw them first. He knocked on my bedroom door, told me quietly and calmly what was happening outside his window, and I said I would be up in a minute and told him to go back to his room and keep watching without doing anything else. He went back and filmed them for 47 continuous minutes on his phone, without my asking him to. He has his mother's instinct for when something matters enough to record. From the kitchen window, I watched them work the full length of the corridor, measuring from the county road junction to the curve behind the HOA entrance, staking the center line in both shoulders, working with the focused competence of a crew that had been briefed and knew what they were supposed to be establishing. When they drove out, 9 orange flags were planted along the lane at roughly 30-foot intervals. I went outside immediately, photographed every flag with my phone, the date and timestamp embedded in every file's metadata, pulled all 9 out of the ground, and stored them in a paper sack in the garage. That afternoon, I called Sandra and asked her to check the County Public Works docket for any recent filings involving my parcel number or the adjacent corridor. She called back 2 hours later, and her voice had the flat, careful quality she uses when what she has found is serious enough to want to say accurately. Greg Stahl had filed a maintenance claim with the County Public Works office 3 weeks earlier, before the crew had ever shown up with their stakes. The claim represented that Stall Land Partners had performed regular road maintenance on the gravel corridor for a continuous period exceeding 10 years, and was entitled on that basis to reclassification of the corridor as a public access easement. It was a specific and formal filing. Not a letter, not a suggestion, but a completed county form with an instrument number and a docket date. A maintenance claim for a road he had never touched, never graded, never graveled, never laid a shovel or a piece of equipment on in any capacity. Howard Briggs had maintained that road with his own tractor from the day he cleared it in 1961. And after Howard, it was Carol and I who had paid to have it graded twice a year and graveled after the spring thaw. Not Greg Stahl. Not a contractor Greg Stahl had ever hired. Not a piece of equipment Greg Stahl had ever dispatched. The claim was in the Public Works docket, assigned a hearing date 6 weeks out. Sandra also told me, in the same call, that the county held a narrow remnant strip of the road parcel itself, a piece left from a 1972 right-of-way acquisition that had never been formally resolved. It was on the county surplus parcel schedule, available for acquisition at assessed value by any qualified buyer. She told me what the process looked like. 3 days after Sandra's call, a sealed envelope appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a printed email chain dated 3 months earlier between Greg and Renee. I had a reasonable idea who had sent it. Boyd Larkin had been on the HOA board for 4 years, and I had been in the same room with him twice at board meetings where I had spoken on the record against the violation notices. He had the particular expression at those meetings of a man who has gone along with something long enough to understand what it has made him, and who has not yet decided what to do about that understanding. The email chain was the decision. In it, Greg laid out the plan in explicit terms. File the maintenance claim. Get the road reclassified before I understood what was in motion. and the ingress permits for the 14 lots would move through without obstruction. He described the financing schedule, the per-lot pricing, the projected sales window, the investor returns. He was specific and businesslike, and completely unsentimental about what the plan required. Renee wrote back in 3 lines. The last one read, "He won't look, he never looks." I read that sentence out loud in the kitchen, to no one. Then I folded the chain, put it in a clear sleeve, labeled it with the date, and placed it at the top of the second accordion file. I called the county surplus property office the next morning and asked about the acquisition process for the remnant road parcel. Sealed bid process, open to any qualified party. Minimum assessed value $4,200, 30-day submission window. I submitted my bid the following Monday morning, notarized, in the amount of $5,000. I filed the paperwork at the county window myself, got a stamped receipt, and drove home. The road parcel was recorded in my name on the 2nd of June. Sandra called that afternoon and read me the instrument number from the recorded deed over the phone, steady and straight, without particular ceremony. I wrote it in the margin of the plat map I had taped to the inside cover of the second accordion file, next to Howard Briggs's original survey notation from 1961. After the sale closed and the results were made public, I learned that the next nearest bid had been $4,250, submitted by Stahl Land Partners 3 days after mine. Greg had been looking for the parcel. He had found it 3 days too late. Before the hearing date, I also filed a counter notice with the county attorney's office. I documented Greg's false maintenance representation, attached the complete contents of both accordion files, included Sandra's 2-page memo, the email chain in its clear sleeve, and the Secretary of State registration showing Greg as the registrant of Regional Compliance Services. I called Deputy Haas and told him what I had filed and why. He was quiet for a moment and then said he had been expecting that call for about a year and a half. He told me that filing a false representation on a public works form was a Class 2 misdemeanor in this state. He said it without inflection or editorial comment, the way he said everything that mattered, and told me the county attorney's office would be in touch with me directly. I thanked him, set the phone down, and stood in the kitchen for a while. 4 years. $800 in unenforceable paper fines. A fake compliance inspector driving a truck registered to Greg Stahl's LLC. Letters sent to my clients. A road staked with false maintenance flags. An email chain that said I would never look. 2 accordion files, a surplus bid, and a counter filing. The folder was complete. Now it went to the counter. The review hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning, and I drove down with the banker's box and Sandra walking beside me from the parking lot to the building entrance. The room was a counter room in the Public Works building, drop ceiling, fluorescent lights, laminate countertop, a row of plastic chairs along the back wall. I had spent 30 years in rooms exactly like it, on the other side of the counter, and the layout felt familiar. Greg arrived about 10 minutes after us with his attorney, a compact man in a gray suit who set a leather portfolio on the counter and glanced at my banker's box with the practiced brief calm of someone who has prepared a thorough argument for a version of events that is about to stop existing. Renee stood just behind Greg's left shoulder in a cream blazer, pearl earrings, and low heels that had gone slightly sideways in the gravel of the parking lot outside. She had not corrected her posture since. She did not look at me when I came in. The county public works supervisor, a woman named Pat, sat across the counter with a docket sheet and a pen. She was not there to be impressed by anyone, and she knew the record in front of her as well as I did. Greg's attorney went first. He spoke for about 8 minutes, standing with the portfolio open in front of him, building the maintenance history with specific cited years. Grading work described in seasonal detail. Gravel tonnage applied. Drainage corrections made. Community vehicles that had relied on the corridor through every winter on the ridge for more than a decade. He named contractors and described scheduling, and concluded that his client had invested in good faith in the maintenance of a corridor the entire community depended on, and held a legitimate and documented basis for the reclassification. He structured it carefully, and he was articulate and precise, and there was not a word of it supported by a single recorded document or an invoice or a piece of equipment ever deployed on that road. When he finished, Pat looked at me across the counter without expression and waited. I set the documents on the counter one at a time, left to right, flat and separate, the way I would lay out survey drawings when I want a client to see the whole picture before I say a single word. The original deed in its clear plastic sleeve. Parcel description, recording date of April 2003. Chain of title running back to Howard Briggs's instrument from 1961. The full 42-year recorded history of the parcel and the east boundary corridor in 4 pages. Beside it, the surplus acquisition deed, the road parcel itself, recorded in my name on the 2nd of June, 6 weeks prior. Beside that, Sandra's memo, 2 pages, plain language, complete absence of any recorded easement, maintenance agreement, license, or instrument of any kind touching the corridor in the county's recorded chain. Beside that, the Secretary of State registration for regional compliance services with Greg's name as the registered agent, dated 8 months before the man with the clipboard had shown up in my driveway. Last, the email chain, unfolded, the date at the top visible to anyone standing at that counter. I placed them flat and separate, not stacked, so each one was readable in full without moving anything else. Pat picked up the original deed. She read the first page slowly, turned to the second, read the parcel description and the chain of title summary, and set it down. She picked up the surplus acquisition deed and checked the parcel number against the deed. She set it down. She read Sandra's memo all the way through, both pages, without setting it down, and then laid it on top of the other 2. She looked at the email chain briefly, then set it aside. Then she looked across the counter at Greg's attorney. The maintenance claim references a road corridor that has been in documented private ownership since 1961, she said. And the road parcel itself was acquired at county surplus sale and re-recorded to the current owner 6 weeks ago. There is nothing here to reclassify. Greg's attorney began a sentence about long-standing community use and reasonable reliance on an established corridor. Pat said, "Use without a recorded right is not a maintenance claim." She stamped the docket sheet. Denied. Greg had gone very still. Not angry, not loud, not the entitled performance Renee had been running for 4 years. Just still. The particular stillness of a man whose project has come apart and who is running the arithmetic of what that means for the 14 lots and the $2,400,000 and the investors who had been told the road was not a problem. Renee was looking at the counter in front of her shoes. I gathered my documents from the counter, returned them to the banker's box in the order I had placed them out, thanked Pat by name, and walked out to the parking lot with Sandra beside me. At the cars, she said Carol would have been proud of the folder. I said Carol would have had it started before I finished reading the first letter. Sandra said she knew. She said she had always liked that about Carol. We drove back in separate directions, and I did not say anything to Cody about the hearing until that evening at dinner, when I told him it was done. He asked how it had gone. I said the record had said what it needed to say. He nodded and went back to his food, and did not ask for more than that, which was very much his mother's way of receiving news that had already been decided. The aftermath unfolded over the following months with a measured, unhurried pace of recorded consequences finding their natural level. Greg's 14 lots had no road. His only viable alternative ingress to the north parcels crossed a county-protected slope he could not get grading permits for, and the engineering cost of any other route turned his $2.4 million in projected lot sales into a loss before a single foundation could be laid. 3 of his 4 outside investors withdrew within 60 days of the hearing date. The development was formally shelved. The county attorney's office opened a review of the false maintenance claim filing, and Greg's attorney negotiated a consent agreement by fall that included a civil penalty and a formal finding of material misrepresentation on a public works document filed with the county. Attorney Price withdrew from the HOA's representation the week after the hearing, citing a conflict he declined to specify in the withdrawal notice. Boyd Larkin circulated a recall petition to the HOA membership in August. 11 of the board's 15 eligible members signed it. 4 voted to keep her, and Renee Stahl was removed from the presidency in a special board vote that September. The $800 in paper fines was never collected, because paper fines written against property you have no authority over are. When the full recorded chain is laid on a county counter and read by someone with a stamp, exactly what they always were. Paper. My gate went up in September of that same year. Cedar posts set in concrete to a depth Howard would have approved of. Heavy steel pin hardware, a drop latch that closes clean and holds without adjustment through any weather the ridge throws at it. Cody helped me set the last post on a Saturday afternoon, and we tamped the base together and stood back in the late light off the ridge to look at it. It was a good gate. He said it looked solid. I said it was. I told him his great-grandfather had built the original survey corner markers on this land with the same idea, that things worth having were worth building correctly the first time. And his mother had kept the paper that recorded why. I told him this gate had been waiting in the ground since 1961, since the day Howard Briggs set his first corner post on this slope and had the boundary surveyed and recorded, whether any of us understood that at the time or not. Cody stood there for a moment the way he stands when he is turning something over, quiet and still with his hands in his jacket pockets. Then he said he thought his mom would have liked the hardware. I said she always had good taste in the things that were meant to last. We went inside and I made dinner, and he told me about his week, and the light came off the ridge the way it does in September, long and warm and unhurried, the way Carol always said she liked it best. Here is what I want you to take from this story. Pull your deed, then pull the deed of every road, lane, path, and easement that borders your property. If someone has been using a corridor across your land for years on informal courtesy and nothing else, that courtesy is not a legal right. In most states, permissive informal use that the landowner has allowed and documented as permissive does not ripen into a prescriptive easement. The clock does not run against a good neighbor, but only if you know the difference between tolerance and title. And the difference lives at your county recorder's office in documents that are public and in most cases free to read. Go read them. While you are there, look at the county's surplus parcel schedule. If your county holds a remnant strip or a resolved right-of-way that borders your land, find out what the acquisition process looks like before someone with a financial motive and a law firm finds it first. Check the county planning docket for any preliminary plats or development applications near your parcel. That docket is public too. Start your documentation file with the very first letter you receive, not the 3rd or the 5th or the 10th. Every violation notice, every certified mail receipt, every date written at the top of every page, every plate number you take down in a margin. The binder does not win the case on the day of the hearing. It wins on the day the other side decides, without checking a single recorded document, that you are not the kind of person who maintains one. And if you have ever had an HOA, a developer, or a neighbor claim authority over land or access they have no legal right to, I want to hear about it. Put your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want to hear what comes next, stay close, because next time we are talking about a woman who inherited a private lake, an HOA that filed to have it declared a community recreational amenity, and a federal fishing license her father recorded before the HOA was ever incorporated. That dispute ran 4 years and ended at a federal agency window, and the HOA did not walk away with a single acre of it.